Okay, bit of night filming. So this is regarding leaks in the fuel line, which make your delivery lines run dry. So the line we're specifically talking about is this one, from the top of the filter. You can't really see through this one anymore, but that's nice and full of fuel right now. And that line runs under there to the low pressure pump. You can see some of the connections there between the return line and the high pressure pump. I replaced the one line. It was very complicated. I nearly broke the line. I definitely broke the clips that mount it onto the engine, so I would recommend you replace both lines at the same time. So that's the line from the filter to the low pressure pump, and I think it connects to one of the return lines, and there's another line in there which connects, I think, to the rail return and then back to one side of the high pressure pump. Anyway, do them both at the same time. They were about 100 Aussie dollars each. So this was the interim fix. You can see both pumps in the picture there. The one at the top here, this was the more expensive and came from a boating store. Now, to be fair, the guy didn't know whether it would be rated for diesel, and as it turns out, it wasn't. You can see it's gone funny shaped and completely lost its shape. The one-way valve failed as well, so this refused to operate as an inline pump anymore after the first use. So one of the connectors looks like generic plastic. That one looks like it might be some kind of nylon connector. No bueno. That was about $25. This guy down here, which is a little bit loose. You can see this one still works today. It's got a little directional line there. So this has got full nylon barbs, wire retainers. It was $10. It was either AliExpress or eBay. It's delivered from China or Hong Kong, and it's just been very good. So let's show you where it is and what it does. So that's the fuel inlet, which normally goes to the top of the fuel filter canister. This is the middle of the three models you can get. There's one that you can get that will join two hoses on it that goes on the Sprinters. This is the one that still takes this plastic line here. So the O-ring down here has been fortified with a bit of fuel-proof plumber's tape. And the second reason I had to get this line is because I originally broke this clip when doing a fuel filter service. So we now have a T-section here, which gives me a dedicated feed line here, so that's sealed on that end. But if I need to do an emergency fill, say if I ran out of fuel in the middle of nowhere and I need to refill from a can, I can prime this directly. So that runs this loop here. There's the fuel bulb there. You prime this, it pulls a vacuum on one side, drives pressure down the other side, and puts that back into the fuel filter canister. If you've got a proper empty, you can actually see my white clip is missing yet again. So there's a retain and release clip that you push there to release that. But if you're proper empty, you can break that off there until you see fuel coming out of the top of the filter canister. Once you've got fuel there, you reattach this line, give it a few more pumps to put a little bit of pressure inside the canister and inside the lines. Even the smallest amount of pressure, when you actually turn the engine over, you'll see that fuel rush up this line. The line doesn't have that much volume in it. Once it hits the low pressure lift pump under there, it gets to the high pressure pump fairly quickly. If you're having major issues, you can be exceptionally careful and take one of the high pressure lines off, and not just a little bit off, a lot off, like let it leak profusely. If you're having major issues, you crack the injector lines at the injector on all 5 of the injectors. This will allow the high pressure pump to get fuel all the way to the top of the injector. Then you lock the lines off. What I do is wash it down with something that's a fuel solvent and then spray it off with some air and usually some kind of evaporating solvent as well, so I can make sure that the top of the fuel lines are dry so I can spot any leaks afterwards. Couple pumps of the bulb, turn it over, the fuel gets very quickly into the lift pump, into the high pressure pump, and by this time, if you've got fuel spilling out of the lines at the injectors, it ought to turn over straight away. There's really not much to the inside of the injector. When it primes the injector the first time and then lifts the pin, and fuel rushes to the end of the injector, and the next time it turns over, it should fire. So yeah, this guy lives in here now. Seems to be quite happy. It's found itself a nice little comfortable hole there. This is a fairly heavy diesel specific, not particularly high pressure fuel line, but it's also doing fine. You can see some interesting butchery from a previous owner. The side cover that's obviously missing here used the wrong screws and went straight through the intake manifold there, so that just leaks all the oil that's being blown in from the very badly worn PCV, and some of the soot and gunge coming from the EGR. Highly recommend, if you're running one of these, especially in warm weather, get a manual bypass or a full delete on your EGR. I see a lot of guys on the forums who've had injectors put in, they've serviced their high pressure pump, they've done everything else except delete the EGR, and I guarantee you it's bad timing or a complete malfunction on the EGR causing that smoking, especially at idle, especially when cold. The other one, get the PCV fixed. That's the oil separator valve. Whether you put a catch can or a new PCV really depends on what the nature of your issue is. If you've got a little bit of pressure in the crankcase, a little bit of blow by, it's going to hit the back of that PCV fairly hard, and you're probably going to get oil coming through regardless. That means you're going to get oil in all these intake lines. Like you probably find this pipe here is clogged full of oil, this will be clogged full of oil. I know this intake has oil in it because if you take these bolts out, these have also got some sealant tape in there, because if they're loose, oil will spew forth from here. So that pretty much means the entire intake manifold is full of oil, and you can see it swimming down there because I haven't done the swell flaps yet. So that's next on the list. Other than that, this has a set of refurb injectors, an EGR manual bypass. So if it was a particularly cold day, I can plug in or unplug a couple of things, or I can manually pull vacuum on that connector there and actually open the EGR and introduce a bit of CO2 and heat to the intake manifold to get it to start and run better at idle. Other than that, it's very happy right now. No soot, no smoke, and about 10 litres per 100 Ks on a combined cycle. The first thing that triggered all of this was, of course, it wouldn't start in the morning, and on advice from the internet, I did check this line here, pulled this back, and sure enough you could see great big air bubbles in there. And this naturally caught me out in the middle of nowhere. It's about 700 Ks out of Adelaide, and went to start it in the morning, got absolutely nothing. Checked this line and it was bone dry. On that occasion, very poorly, had to connect 2 batteries and crank it for 2 solid minutes before it actually turned over, and we didn't turn it off again until we got back home, and that's when this chapter started, and that begat the rest of the repairs. So start simple, get rid of the air bubbles, then look at the EGR. Once you've done those 2 things, I would even say do the PCV and the swell flaps before you even contemplate replacing the injectors. Do the injector seats, highly recommend. Do it correctly the first time. Make sure the engine is red hot before you try and pull them out, and use a ton of acetone to melt the carbon deposits. It turns it to a rubbery gelatinous compound instead of the stone. It really is like solid carbon, bit like diamond. It will not come out when it's cold. You will more than likely ruin bits of the upper part of the head, especially the rocker cover. Once it's all sorted, runs like a dream. Good luck everyone. Lovely cars.